"We'll be accepting Madison's portion on her behalf," my father said smoothly at the will reading. "She's always been generous. Ryan will use it wisely." The lawyer froze mid-sentence. My parents smiled like it was already settled. I opened my mouth to speak, but someone else did first. I think my grandmother said, rising slowly, "We should all hear the rest of the will," before anyone makes decisions that aren't theirs. I stood up and didn't sit back down. It wasn't always obvious. The favoritism, the hierarchy, the way my family handed love out like a prize for performance. But over time, I learned to read the signs, and I learned that I would never win. My name is Madison Claire Whitmore. I'm 28, and until I walked into that lawyer's office for my grandfather's will reading, I honestly believed I'd made peace with being invisible. But invisibility isn't peace. It's slow erosion. Growing up, it was always Ryan, my younger brother, the golden boy, the future. And me, I was the responsible one, the quiet achiever, the girl who handled things so well that eventually no one noticed she was handling anything at all. On my 10th birthday, my mom baked a cake from a box. We lit a single candle at the dinner table. I remember the frosting sliding off and sticking to the tin foil. She smiled, kissed my forehead, and said, "You don't need much, Maddie. You've always been so easy." 3 months later, for Ryan's 7th birthday, the backyard was a circus. Pony rides and magician balloons that twisted into animals. My parents posed for pictures beaming beside him like he'd already made them proud just by turning 7. I watched from the kitchen, holding the plastic knife from my birthday cake, and quietly put it back in the drawer. That was the first time I understood what it meant to be the child they loved quietly. School didn't change much. I was the straight A student, debate team, science fair finalist, lead editor of the school paper. I collected accolades like armor, hoping one would finally get a real smile out of them, but the praise never came. "We expect that from you," Madison Dad would say with a shrug, but when Ryan scraped by with B's pizza night, balloons, let's celebrate your progress. When I got into a top-tier university with a full merit scholarship, I called home expecting excitement. "Good for you, honey," Mom said. "Did you hear Ryan made the varsity team?" I should have said something, but I didn't want to sound jealous. I didn't want to prove their unspoken point that I was too serious, too emotional, too needy. So I swallowed the ache. Again. While Ryan switched majors 3 times and took a year off to find himself, I picked up 2 part-time jobs to afford off-campus housing. When I asked for help with textbooks one semester, Mom replied, "You'll figure it out. You always do." So I did. I taught myself to budget. I learned to stretch grocery money so far I could cook for a week on $15. I took freelance design work in between classes, and by junior year, I had enough saved to move into a tiny studio apartment where the heat barely worked, but it was mine. I called home less often. When I did, the conversation always found its way back to Ryan, his new app idea, his latest girl. The funny thing he said at brunch. I listened. I nodded. I performed daughterhood the way I always had, quiet, competent, unthanked. When graduation came, I was one of only 2 students selected to present at the University Design Expo. I invited my parents, sent 3 reminders, reserved them seats. They didn't come. They drove 6 hours that weekend. But not for me. Ryan had an amateur drone racing competition. That night, I performed for strangers. Afterward, I sat in my dorm alone and checked my phone. 1 message from Mom. "Sorry we couldn't make it, sweetheart." Ryan's drone placed 3rd. Isn't that amazing? I stared at the screen for a long time before locking it. That was the moment I stopped trying. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. I would never be enough, not because I lacked anything, but because they had already decided who mattered more. After graduation, I landed a job at a mid-sized financial firm. I worked hard, moved up, and by 26, I bought a small condo on my own. 1 bedroom, clean lines, sunlight in the kitchen. I invited them to see it. I hoped in some quiet part of me that they'd be proud. They walked in, glanced around, and said, "It's nice. We always knew you'd do fine," as if that was the point. that I'd survive them. Ryan at that time still lived at home. He was developing an app again. My parents had just invested in his latest idea. He just needs a little capital to get going. Dad told me over dinner. He's got real potential. I nodded. I didn't ask if they remembered the loan I took out at 19 for summer housing, or how I'd spent Christmas one year tutoring math to 6th graders because I couldn't afford the flight home. They didn't. And maybe that was the deepest cut of all, not what they gave Ryan, but what they took from me. My place, my voice, my right to be seen. So when the letter came thick, envelope official seal words, reading of the last will and testament of James C. Whitmore, I didn't feel excited. I didn't even expect anything. I just hoped for one sentence that said I mattered. I marked the date in my calendar, and then the day before the reading, another envelope arrived. This one handwritten. Grandma's careful script across the front. Inside was a card. No fluff. Just this, Madison, come to the reading. It's important. Your grandfather made sure of something. Please don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Love, Grandma. It was the first time in years someone in the family asked me to show up because I should not, because I had to, and I knew something was coming. So I took the day off work, ironed my blazer, tied my hair back, and walked into that lawyer's office like it was a battlefield, because somewhere inside I already knew they were going to try one last time to erase me, but I wasn't the same girl anymore. The room felt cold despite the sunlight streaming through the blinds. The lawyer shuffled the papers like they might catch fire, his brow furrowing as he read the final line aloud, again, equal share to Madison Claire Whitmore. The name echoed in the stillness. I didn't smile. I didn't move. My father did. He stood up so fast his chair squeaked backward. Let's be reasonable, he said, voice suddenly cheerful in a way that made my stomach clench. Madison's doing great. She has her condo, her career. Ryan's still finding his footing. This would mean so much more to him. He gestured vaguely at Ryan like he was some charity case. Ryan blinked, expression unreadable. She's never cared much about these things, Dad added, waving toward the estate documents. She's always been generous. And then Mom, with that sing-song softness that always preceded a guilt trip, Madison's not materialistic. She's a giver. She's strong. She doesn't need help. Ryan's the dreamer. This could launch his future. Dreamer. That word again, as if chasing delusions entitled him to other people's futures. I kept my hands folded in my lap, but I could feel my pulse rising in my neck. Ryan's last venture had been a failed crypto app with no functionality. Before that, a vlog channel that lasted 5 episodes. He slept till noon most days. And now here he was, silent watching, as our parents built him a throne out of what they tried to strip from me. I took a breath and spoke. Calm. Measured. Deadly. I don't need anyone to accept anything on my behalf. The room stilled. Mom's smile flickered. Dad's voice sharpened instantly. This isn't about you, Maddie. It's about family. About what's fair. Fair? I almost laughed. Mom pressed her palms together like prayer. Don't let pride cloud your judgment. You've always had a good head on your shoulders. No, this wasn't pride. This was survival. I'm not giving up what Grandpa left me. I said louder this time. I could see them unraveling. My father's mouth twisted, and then he did what I feared he would. He launched into a tally. All we've done for you, he began. We paid for your braces. We gave you a roof. We helped with books. You think any of that was free? The words hung in the air like a slap. Mom added softly, if you loved us, you'd do what's right for the family. There it was, the oldest trick in the Whitmore book equating obedience with love. I looked at Ryan, still silent, still shrinking. The boy king too cowardly to take off the crown. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. My throat locked. The shame sat heavy in my lungs. I hated that even now part of me wanted to explain, to justify, to ask why I was never enough. Then I felt it. A hand light and steady pressed onto mine. Grandma. She leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes steel beneath soft wrinkles. "You don't owe them anything," she said, quiet, unshakable, and your grandfather knew it. The room froze. No one dared speak. Even the lawyer looked at her with reverence. And I realized right then this wasn't just about money. It was about voice. Mine. The one they'd spent years teaching me to silence in the name of harmony, in the name of family. But I was done shrinking for peace. The lawyer cleared his throat. Unless Madison chooses to sign a waiver or grant power of attorney, her share is legally hers, entirely. My father's face went red. We'll see about that. I almost expected him to slam the table. Instead, he stood tall and did something worse. He put on that polished, righteous voice he used at community fundraisers. "She was always cold," he said to the room, "always distant. She pulled away from us. She isolated herself. I could barely breathe." Mom chimed in, tearful now. "She's never been grateful. We did everything we could." The lawyer began packing up. Grandma stood with me, her hand still on mine. My parents gathered their coats in a silent fury. Dad muttered something about betrayal. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that stayed dry. Ryan followed behind them. He didn't look back, and I sat there in the echo of my full name. Not a nickname, not Maddie, not a whisper. Madison Claire Whitmore. For the first time, it didn't feel like a formality. It felt like a title I had earned. After they left, I stayed in that room, alone with the ghost of my grandfather's voice and the dust-moted light slicing across the desk. No one rushed me. Not the lawyer, not Grandma. It was as if they knew I needed a minute not to recover, but to reassemble. The door finally clicked shut behind them, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. I wasn't just exhausted. I was grieving. Not just Grandpa, but everything I'd been pretending not to feel. The years of invisibility, the crumbs of recognition handed out like favors, the warped definition of love I'd been fed since I could walk. I went home and didn't speak to anyone. I turned off my phone, not in defiance, but in defense, because I knew what was coming. Sure enough, the next day the text started, from Mom. "You embarrassed us in front of the family. Was it worth it?" From Dad. "Hope you enjoy your blood money. We'll remember this." And then Ryan. Just one line, "I didn't ask for any of this." That one hurt, because in some corner of my heart I still hoped he might speak up, that he might have pulled me aside after the will reading and said, "This isn't right." But he didn't. He watched in silence, like he always had. By day 3, the silence in my apartment had become too thick to breathe. I stood at the sink, still in my blazer, staring out the window at nothing, my untouched coffee cold in my hand. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the lake house. Grandpa's old cabin sat 3 hours out, tucked among the pines, the driveway buried under leaves. No one had used it since he passed. I had the spare key from years ago when he used to call it our little escape. The moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. It smelled like cedar and old blankets, and the faintest echo of coffee. I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't check my phone. I built a fire the way Grandpa taught me, small kindling. First dry wood, stacked with purpose. Then I curled into the armchair by the hearth and let the tears come. Not loud, not angry, silent, long overdue. Grief for the man who saw me, and grief for the girl who'd spent her whole life trying to earn what should have been given freely. I stayed there overnight, wrapped in blankets, the fire crackling like a lullaby. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was sacred. The next morning I went into the guest room to find fresh towels, and that's when I saw it. A drawer slightly ajar. Inside, a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's careful, blocky script. My breath caught. I sat on the bed, turned it over in my hands. The paper was thick, the kind Grandpa always used. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Maddie. If you're reading this, the will's been read and your parents are probably furious. I want you to know something before their voices drown yours out again. I saw everything. the way they gave Ryan a stage and handed you a mop, the way they celebrated his attempts and ignored your victories, the way they told you to be strong, then punished you for being independent. I didn't leave this to you because you needed it. I left it to you because you earned it. Every single day you kept walking. Every single time you clapped for others while no one clapped for you. Your voice matters, Maddie. Don't let them convince you it doesn't. Love always, Grandpa. I read it 3 times, then folded it carefully, reverently. It wasn't about the money, it never had been. It was about the sentence I saw everything, because that was all I ever wanted. For someone, anyone, to look at my quiet effort and say, "You were never invisible." When I returned to the city 2 days later, something inside me had changed. Not hardened, not shattered, clarified. I called Grandma. She answered on the first ring. "Did you find the letter?" she asked, like she already knew. "Yes," I whispered. "Thank you." She paused before responding. "Your grandfather believed that love could be quiet, but it should never be invisible," she said, "and he made sure you'd be protected." I furrowed my brow. Protected? That's when she told me the rest. Grandma didn't raise her voice when she explained it. She didn't need to. "Your parents tried to pressure your grandfather," she said over the phone, her voice steady but heavy with a weariness I'd never heard before. "Months before he died, they visited the house. They said Ryan needed the inheritance more than you did, that you were fine, stable, already successful, that it made more sense to give it all to him." She paused, letting that sink in. "They said you'd understand, that you'd step aside with grace." She added, "I felt the blood drain from my face, but your grandfather didn't agree. He told them no, and then he got a lawyer involved. Turns out Grandpa had seen the pattern too. He'd seen the favoritism, the dismissal, the manipulation disguised as love, and he didn't want to let it happen one final time after he was gone. So quietly, carefully, he drafted a clause into the will, with Grandma and his attorney as witnesses. If anyone attempted to challenge or redirect the terms of the estate, especially under the pretense of managing someone else's portion, they would forfeit their own. It was airtight, enforceable, not symbolic, but binding. And my parents, in their arrogance, had walked straight into the trap. "I warned them," Grandma said, "told them not to interfere, but they thought they could bluff their way through." She let out a breath, more like a sigh of sadness than triumph. They always thought their charm would carry them. I sat on the edge of my bed, Grandpa's letter still clutched in one hand, the phone warm in the other. "So, what now?" I asked. "Their share is being frozen pending a legal review," she replied. "They've already been informed. They're furious." Of course they were. "But there's more," she added gently. "Your grandfather left instructions. If things got ugly, I'm to remove your father as executor. The firm will take over. It's already in motion." I closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, someone in the family hadn't just seen the injustice. They'd prepared for it, legally, deliberately. It felt like someone had built a lighthouse for me in the middle of a storm I thought I had to weather alone. That night, the knock came. I hadn't expected them. I should have. My parents stood on my doorstep like specters, elegantly dressed, eyes red fury barely contained. My mother's mascara was smudged. My father's face was brick red. "You planned this," he spat before I even opened the screen door fully. "You poisoned him against us." "No," I said calmly. "He made his own decisions." He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You manipulated your grandmother, turned her against her own son. She read the will," I said, "just like you did." Mom stepped forward, hands twisting together. "Maddie, this doesn't have to be ugly. Just sign the waiver. Let Ryan use the money. He needs it. You've always been so self-sufficient, so stable. This isn't like you, isn't like me." They had erased me for years, and now that I finally held something that couldn't be denied, they wanted me to fold, to prove once again that I could live without. But I wasn't going to be that girl anymore. "No," I said. My father's voice dropped into a growl. Then you've made your choice. Enjoy your money, because you've lost your family. He turned on his heel and walked down the steps. My mother lingered for half a second. She looked at me like she was about to cry. But nothing came, just one final choked whisper. You were always so cold, Madison. And then she left too. I didn't cry. Not this time. Because I realized something standing alone in that doorway. I hadn't lost my family. I just stopped pretending they were one. The days that followed were quiet. No more calls, no more texts. The rage had gone radio silent. But I wasn't alone. Grandma called every afternoon. Her voice was a tether I hadn't known I needed. Your grandfather would be proud, she said once. Not because you fought, but because you stopped apologizing for existing. At work, I stayed focused, but the silence of evenings felt different now. Not hollow, not sharp, just clean, empty, in the way a blank page is. Then one evening, just as I was finishing dishes, the buzzer rang. I checked the monitor. Ryan. He stood in the lobby in a hoodie and jeans, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes unsure. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then finally, I pressed the button. When he walked into the apartment, he didn't sit. He just stood there in the middle of the room like he'd stepped into someone else's house. I didn't know they were going to do that, he said finally, at the will reading. I didn't ask them to. But you didn't stop them either, I replied. My voice was soft. Not angry. Just tired. He flinched. I know. Silence stretched between us. Then slowly he pulled something from his pocket, a folded letter. I got one too, he said. From Grandpa. Grandma gave it to me a few days ago. He unfolded it carefully. His eyes were red. It wasn't nice, but it was honest. I waited. He told me to stop letting other people fight my battles, that letting Mom and Dad shape me into their legacy had made me a stranger to myself, that it was time to grow up, to own my choices, to apologize. He looked up. I'm sorry, Maddie. Not just for this. For everything. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I said, thank you. And it wasn't about winning or being right. It was about hearing the one thing I'd waited my whole life for. Acknowledgement. We didn't hug that night. Ryan left after we talked, walking into the cold with his hands buried in his hoodie pockets, shoulders hunched like a boy again. I didn't know what would happen next between us, but I knew something had shifted. Not dramatically, not magically, but for the first time he didn't seem to be floating. He was choosing to stand, and I was choosing not to shrink anymore. A week passed. No word from our parents, but I was okay with that. I kept Grandpa's letter on my nightstand. I read it sometimes before bed, not because I needed the words, but because I wanted to remember how it felt to finally be seen. Then one morning I got an email from the estate lawyer. Subject update on executor status body. Your father has been officially removed as executor of the Whitmore estate. Oversight has transferred to the firm as per your grandfather's directive. No fanfare, no drama. Just a line in black and white that meant they don't have control anymore. I stared at that email for a long time, not because it shocked me, but because of what it represented. I was finally free from the quiet, constant weight of their rewriting, the red pen they'd used on my life. Gone. And I intended to make that freedom count. Later that week, I met with a financial advisor. We talked through the inheritance, modest but solid. Grandpa had diversified well, enough to provide cushion, enough to make plans. One evening, I sat with Grandma on her front porch. We shared tea and silence, the kind that only exists between people who've already said the important things. I think I want to do something with it, I told her. Not just save it. Not just buy something shiny. She smiled. What are you thinking? I hesitated, then spoke. I want to start a mentorship fund for young women in design and tech, especially those from families that never believed in them. Grandma nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. You'd be giving them what no one gave you. Exactly, I said, and I want to name it after Grandpa." She reached over and squeezed my hand. He would have loved that. That night, I started drafting plans, setting up an LLC, talking to colleagues, outlining structure outreach scholarships. It gave me something more than revenge ever could: legacy. 3 weeks later, Ryan texted me a photo of his student ID, community college, software design, one class at a time, the message read. Underneath, he wrote, "I know I'm late, but I'm finally starting." I didn't cry, but I did smile. For him, for me, for the version of us that could have been and the one that might still be. He started sending me his assignments, his test scores, his design drafts. Sometimes I teased him, "So now you're the nerd," and he'd send back a string of laughing emojis. We started something new, sibling Sundays. Once a month, no phones, no parents, just us. Pancakes, long walks, board games, talking. Sometimes about the past, sometimes not, but always honest. One Sunday, while we were clearing dishes, Ryan asked, "Do you think they'll ever come around?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about all the years I spent chasing their approval like a train that never stopped for me. "I don't know," I said finally, "but I'm not waiting anymore." He nodded. We sat on the couch, the window cracked open, letting in autumn air. The leaves outside burned orange and red like fire, preparing to turn into quiet ash. "You know, Ryan said you were never the problem." "I know," I said softly. "Took me a while, but I know. That silence between us. It used to be filled with shame. Now it felt like peace." The next day I went to therapy. I brought Grandpa's letter with me. My therapist read it, folded it gently, handed it back. "He saw you," she said. "I finally saw myself," I replied. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights I still found myself staring at the ceiling, remembering my mother's voice dripping with disappointment, my father's eyes hard with judgment. But those nights didn't define me anymore, because something else did. Choice. Not their expectations, not their manipulations, mine. I chose to speak up, to keep what was mine, to believe that love isn't proven by sacrifice, but by presence. And presence means not shrinking anymore so someone else can shine. It's been just over a year. The foundation is officially live. We called it the Whitmore Initiative. Its mission is simple: to support young women, especially those overlooked or erased by the very people meant to uplift them. We offer grants, mentoring, portfolio reviews, and internship pipelines across architecture, design, and tech. It started small, just a few applicants, a few essays that broke my heart open all over again. But then the word spread. And now we have partnerships with 2 universities, one design firm and a tech incubator that offered free office space downtown. Women are coming through our doors not with polished resumes, but with quiet fire. And for the first time, I get to be the person I always needed growing up, someone who says, "I see you. I believe in you. Let's build." Ryan's finishing his first year. He still struggles, especially with the weight of realizing how long he let others speak for him. But he owns it now. He's applied to transfer into a 4-year program. He started tutoring others in math. And a few months ago, he sent me something unexpected, a letter, written in his messy handwriting, folded into thirds. Inside, just one line. "Thank you for showing me how to stand. I keep that letter beside Grandpa's. 2 moments, 2 men, 1 family legacy rewritten. As for my parents, they still haven't reached out." There was a brief email months ago, no apology, just a list of accusations disguised as concern, a final attempt at control. I didn't reply, not out of malice, but because some silence is a boundary, not a punishment. They had their chance, many of them, and I'm no longer performing daughterhood for people who only clap when I'm invisible. I visit Grandma every Sunday. We drink tea. We play Scrabble. Sometimes we talk about Grandpa. Sometimes we talk about the young women from the foundation. She keeps a little scrapbook with clippings and photos. She tells her bridge club, "I'm a rebel with good manners." I like that. Last month, I stood on a panel at a design conference in Austin. They called me the quiet force in adaptive architecture. I gave a talk titled, Building Beyond Survival Designing When They Never Expected You to Win. When I stepped off stage, a woman no older than 22 waited for me in the hallway. She didn't say much, just held out a wrinkled piece of paper, a printout of the Whitmore Initiative's mission statement. She'd highlighted the sentence, "You don't have to be someone else's afterthought to be your own beginning." She hugged me without asking, and I hugged her back, hard, because I understood the kind of ache that comes from being invisible in your own story. But I also knew you can reclaim the pen. You can start a new chapter without asking the old one for permission. You can burn quietly, then rise and still call it love. So here's my final thought, and my question to you. Maybe you've been the one erased, overlooked, or told your silence was maturity, your selflessness a virtue. Maybe you've watched someone else be handed the dream you built. Maybe you've been told you're just being dramatic when all you ever wanted was to be chosen back. If that's you, what would you do with the pen now if you stopped shrinking, if you stopped explaining, if you stopped waiting for them to love you the way you already deserve to be loved? What would you write next? Because the truth is, the moment you stop begging to be understood, the moment you stop auditioning for someone else's approval, that's when you begin. And you don't need their permission. You just need your own. So take the pen. Your story doesn't end in their silence. It begins in yours.